The following is an Operation Podcast production.
Did not have that much time to adapt, and that was a big part of the work is re-identifying with self and integrating the self, connecting with authenticity. And that is a delicate dance with people that are still very in the active duty mindset. That is how you do it, is you really are curious enough to look into a person and to want to know their experience. And when somebody feels truly felt, that's much more powerful than them having had the same exact experience, because it's unlikely that we're going to share the same exact experience with anybody. And it takes you out of the past, because I'm asking you what's happening right now. And the more we can bring it to this moment, the more we're accessing a more organized, coherent brain. The healing is really in the overtones of sound. It's not the strike of an instrument that creates a specific frequency. Or, there's a lot of research with cancer and it kind of exploding cancer cells using frequency. Hi, my name is Malorie Lindqvist, licensed clinical social worker and certified sound healer, and this is Ever Forward Radio.
Let us know kind of more your professional credentials and background to kind of set the tone for the rest of the show.
Yeah, well, I'm Malorie Lindqvist, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and also a NARM therapist and a certified sound healer. And my background primarily is in kind of traditional therapy and having worked with many different demographics. I started in Austin. That's where I did my graduate program at UT Austin. And then I stayed there for about 7 years working in inpatient psychiatric units with kids and teens. And then I worked in some residential treatment centers there. And then I had opened a private practice where I was just seeing people individually. And so I was a bit of a workhorse at that time and just really so devoted to the work. And then I just got the call to move home. I wanted to come back to San Diego where my entire family is. And I knew that it meant letting go of this whole network that I had established in Austin. And something in me just said, like, you weren't growing anymore as a provider. I was kind of in this space of just the routine of doing the thing and doing, of course, really honorable work, but feeling this call towards working with the military. And so I essentially quit all my jobs, packed up my stuff, moved home, and started over. And it meant getting my license again. I had to go through the test for California license.
That's right, state by state it varies. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was a whole thing. And then eventually I got through the security clearance, which was like a 9-month process to get into Camp Pendleton. And I got in, and it was really the most gratifying work that I've done. And it was so meaningful to just be part of an organization that was so different from me. I walked in and everybody looked at me like I was this hippie, like this alien person that they just could not relate to in any capacity. And I came up to like a lot of friction with the employees, because a lot of people that were working in that facility, they had prior service experience. And so, that's why they're there. They're passionate about that work. And so it was a lot of growing pains, but all of it was quite fun. And what I loved was just working with trauma. I feel really passionate about working with trauma, and specifically that population with active duty military and veterans as well. But active duty is a special breed.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, and someone that spent 6 years in active duty. I was in Fort Sam Houston. I was in Lackland Air Force Base for a little bit, then Fort Sam Houston. And then I was in the Warrior Transition Unit out of Brooke Army Medical Center for about a year and a half. And I was medically retired in 2009.
It's so fascinating, that period too, and just transition is not generally treated delicately in the military.
No.
It needs so much more time and work. And I mean, the population that I was working with, it was for mental health reasons and substance abuse as well. But I was always with people just before they kind of pushed them out.
Yeah.
And that period would be so small. And so they just did not have that much time to adapt. And that was a big part of the work, is re-identifying with self and integrating the self, connecting with authenticity. And that is a delicate dance with people that are still very in the active duty mindset,
Why that call for you? Why going to work with active duty soldiers, or in your case, these were Marines, right? So active
And it was Navy,
and Navy,
too.
right?
Yeah.
So why working with active duty service members?
I wanted to be in an environment where the threat response was still being activated. And part of that is because the system itself is triggering to people that have experienced trauma. And it's hard to find somebody that has military experience that doesn't have some experience of trauma in their lifetime. Often that's what pulls them into that environment, is seeking that brotherhood, sisterhood even. And so I wanted to just be amongst it and to just have that real-time experience. And I don't know, there's a part of me that even as you asked me that, I'm not even 100% sure. That's why I say it was like a calling. It's like, this is the next thing. Most of the things in my life have been this kind of sacral intuition that comes up.
Like a pull.
It's a pull that I'm just like following. And I don't always know why. And then I get there and I'm like, oh, yes, this is why. And it's such a profound experience to have that. I did a ayahuasca ceremony actually, how long was it, a year and a half ago maybe? A year and a half ago. And it was so fascinating because when the shaman was describing her experience of me, she said, you have the same template as a soldier. You feel very defensed in your body and your energy. You feel like you have layers of protection around you. And it was probably the most validating thing that I've heard, even though I didn't really look at myself like that. I feel very open-hearted and, just open-hearted. But when she said that, it felt like this parallel to my experience of really feeling such an attunement and a bond with the people that I worked with. It was just the most powerful thing.
Did you ever encounter that experience working with someone who, maybe hopefully didn't throw that back in your face, but did you ever feel like there was some kind of hill that needed to be taken in order to get on that common ground because on their side of it, like you can't relate kind of thing? Yes,
that was a big theme that came up, and it manifested in different ways. It would be really funny, I'd have these moments where, because there was men and women that I would work with, and there'd be a lot of push away in the dynamic of, there wasn't trust established, which of course, that makes sense to me. You have to build trust with any person that you're working with. But the way that they would go about the push away was funny. But then you get into that space, that container, where it's just human to human. And there's something that's happening in the nervous system. There is this co-regulation that's happening that is establishing a sense of safety. They are borrowing my nervous system to activate essentially the parasympathetic state. And so in that is our point of connection. It is the social engagement center. And so that sort of nervous system regulation and connection trumps any of those stories. And it's a really powerful embodied experience of felt sense of safety. And so it starts to change the narrative, organically. It changes the narrative without so much efforting in the mind of like, okay, there's this woman here that's showing up every day. She seems like she cares. Like none of that really matters. What matters more is the nervous systems and how they're communicating with each other. And so I found that, yes, those moments came up where there was a dismissal or a rejection or a push away. And we always got to a place of connection. I didn't have a single patient that I worked with where we didn't get there.
What was your process? Was it just a matter of time, or did you have a particular protocol? How did you get there with everyone?
That's such a great question that I've never really thought about. I think it's being a human. I think in the world of therapy, there's a lot of pressure to be a bit of like an avatar that says and does the right things. And for me, I just am myself, and I just want to embody authenticity because it's a very powerful experience that is contagious and that amplifies authenticity in others. So I find that the more authentic that I was and the more grounded in my own nervous system, the more we could establish the safety and trust that allowed a person to choose self-disclosure over defense. And so I don't know how to teach somebody to do that other than to say, like, be you, be a human. And that invites that in others. And it would be this really lovely experience because we'd move through, I did this intensive outpatient program where it was a 8-week cycle where I would work with a group and I'd be able to work with everybody individually, and then we'd work in a process group format together in the cohort, and then we'd have a psychoeducation group a couple times a week. So it was like 2 process groups, 2 psychoed, 1 individual. So I spent a lot of time with these people and in these different contexts, which was really powerful just to see a person in different contexts and how they show up, for them to see me in different contexts. And it's really relational. It's a very relational dependent situation. And by the end of it, they would talk about, it was such a common thing to talk about me as the ninja, like the ninja that would just like get in there, like, I don't know how
no matter
she
the
does
format,
it.
she was there, swooping in and staying. Yeah.
And essentially what they're saying is that they felt seen. And that is how you do it, is you really are curious enough to look into a person and to want to know their experience. And when somebody feels truly felt, that's much more powerful than them having had the same exact experience, because it's unlikely that we're going to share the same exact experience with anybody, really.
Very true. Even the same person over prolonged periods of time, if you're, to your point, doing the work, I mean, you're growing, they're growing, you're never really ever the same person, even in these different rooms.
Yeah. And sometimes it can be profoundly moving to feel felt by somebody that hasn't sat in your shoes.
How so?
Well, one of the things that I was really passionate about in that program there was I believed, this ruffled a lot of feathers, but I believed that we needed to integrate trauma groups, types of trauma, as they would say, a trauma focus group rather than a combat-related trauma group and a sexual trauma group, to blend the two and to have men and women, men that have seen combat with, and some women, with primarily women and some men that had experienced sexual trauma, and to put them in the same group. There's a lot of stuff that is not relatable, and a lot of the things that were not relatable were stories shared by 2 men that have experienced combat. The essence of their traumas were vastly different. And it was really a powerful experience for, somebody to just hold space for another person, for the group to hold space. And it's of course it's pleasant to feel that empathy and really, I really relate with that, and I've been there. I see you. And another version of that is I have no idea what that is like, but feeling that now with you, it pains me to know you've gone through that, and it weighs so heavy on me, and I just care for you. That is a very profound experience too. And I think that's what was so powerful in those groups that I was so really privileged to be in, is sitting amongst men and women sharing their stories and them learning that the impact of trauma and how it affects them in their daily life, the symptoms feel quite similar. The stories might be different. The actual traumatic events might be different, but the challenges that they're having in just getting through the day is really relatable. And so building this support network where they're helping each other navigate through the trauma, I mean, it couldn't have been a more beautiful process. Despite the fact that these people are really suffering, it was also really beautiful to bear witness to it all.
You said earlier self-disclosure. And I think that's a really key point in any therapeutic experience, whether we're soldier, civilian, whatever, but also as the therapist and the one receiving the therapy. I think that's where a lot of people struggle in terms of adherence, is not feeling there's this kind of mutual level of self-disclosure, so that they feel safe. They feel like they can really, maybe not immediately put their guard down, but I can see myself putting some walls down with you down the road. How would you advise someone who is maybe in that experience of, I don't know if my therapist is the one, I don't know if I feel like I can get there in this kind of therapy environment. How can we get to this level of self-disclosure so that the work really can get done?
Well, it's exactly that. It is sharing those questions, sharing that curiosity of, I'm not sure what, there feels like there's a bit of a barrier here. I'm not sure what's getting in the way of this. Right now I'm feeling a bit of distance or, closed off energy from you as the client to express these things, what's coming up in the moment in the relationship, because it is a relational container and it's meant to be. I mean, that's how we grow. Part of how we grow is, especially with trauma, it's in kind of spreading the trauma load in our body, being able to build capacity for how our body is responding to the different triggers. But another piece is sharing in a safe relational container. So, and not to say this is about trauma, and this is just therapy in general. But if we don't have that relationship on like a safety level, then it is really hard to have any sort of impact in our life. And so if you're motivated for the work, then sharing that and doing the work to get there, of course you can just say, well, this person maybe isn't a good fit and I'm going to try somebody else. Or there's an invitation there to explore what's actually happening in this dynamic, what's coming up in me and what's coming up in you. And is this something that we can work through? Because maybe this is really a pattern in my world. Maybe this I don't know if I can trust this person is really a bit of a strategy for myself to avoid the intimacy.
Is there maybe a litmus test or a couple questions or a question we could ask ourselves so that we can maybe get to some radical honesty about that and know, all right, it's just me telling myself some kind of story, or I'm repeating a pattern, or is there actually some significance to me not moving forward?
Yeah, I think the question that I always come back to is, how am I relating to myself in this moment? As I'm in this dynamic with this person, what am I telling myself? What's coming up for me around this relationship? And getting curious. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to find the answer, but it's that inquiry that we're looking at.
I mean, what is the feeling? What is the emotion? What is the memory? Or it's just kind of that open-ended, what is happening when?
It's very present oriented. So what's happening now for me in this moment when I'm sitting across from my therapist and I'm noticing I don't know if she's really, caring, or I don't know if she's a good fit for me, or whatever the wonder is. It's turning it inward and how am I relating to myself right now? What is coming up for me as I'm sitting here? Okay, well, maybe I'm judging myself in this. Maybe I'm judging my ability to connect with her.
That sounds like taking a lot of ownership in that situation, where I think a lot of people might just have the expectation that my therapist, because of their credentials or past history or recommendation, or maybe because of X amount of experiences or sessions we've had, they should be at this level. They should know, they should be able to kind of pull these things out of me. But there is a significant level of ownership and radical responsibility that we have to call upon ourselves, in order for that relationship to be able to happen, much less flourish.
Yeah, there's in NARM, the model that I'm trained in, neuroaffective relational model, a big pillar is this idea of agency. And it's exactly what you're speaking to. A lot of the inquiry is around kind of cultivating some agency in our language and how we relate to ourselves. And it's very different from self-blame. It's not about saying this is fault. Oh, it's my fault that, we're not connecting. It's more looking at, is there something that I'm doing that is getting in the way of this? And then often these patterns, we can see the way that they play out in other relationships or in other dynamics, and how we might really want something for ourselves and be actively getting in the way of obtaining it because we are really motivated to kind of protect our survival strategies because they served us. They kept us alive.
Yeah.
In many different contexts, these strategies that we use that are kind of outdated and that aren't serving us now in present moment, at some point they were very functional for us. So it is about having agency, and it can be a really kind of freeing experience to say, wow, like I'm doing this thing again. And being curious about it without judging it as what you should be doing different, but just really developing the relationship with it.
You've mentioned motivation a couple of times, and I think some people might hear that and go, well, that's why I'm in therapy, because I'm trying to get motivated about this stuff, or I'm in therapy because my willingness to my mental health lacks motivation, so I need this kind of professional help and guidance and accountability. What role does motivation play in the therapy world, and how can we develop it even when we feel like we lack it?
Yeah, so good. Well, I think we start out a bit at a deficit there with that, right? When we have this goal to just be motivated, because that's not really granular enough for us. Because we really want to look at, well, what would that look like? What exactly am I aiming to feel? What state of being am I looking for? How would I know that I was motivated? And getting really, really curious about what that actually looks like for me. Because we can default to, well, I'm just not motivated. And so I won't do the thing, I can't do the thing, and we can kind of sit in this disempowered place of, well, I just am not motivated. And the motivation is really kind of the story that we tell ourselves to get to ultimately what we really want. And so as the person sitting on the other side, I want to know more so, what is it that you think motivation is going to bring you?
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, you could spend a lot of time just with that. You could spend a whole session just looking at what state we're really trying to access.
Since I started back in therapy, it's been it's like 5 months now, since really the beginning of the year. And I've kind of caught myself going, or talking about it with my wife or a friend, and like, so how's therapy going, or what are you you liking? And sometimes it's like, oh, breakthrough, amazing, like super cool. Other times it's, I guess I did the thing, but I'm very excited about my level of motivation to stay adherent. I'm definitely committed to just putting in the reps, because I know this is something that I haven't had consistent reps with. So it makes me think about how, I guess, really a level of motivation I wasn't fully aware of that I had to this type of work. Not necessarily motivation of finding answers or healing or being healed or putting the past behind me, whatever the thing is that I'm there to talk about, but just how important motivation is to just do this kind of thing.
Yeah. And what is it that it is offering you? What keeps you going?
It's offering me a really unique mirror. It's offering me professional insight that I don't already know, or B, are things, and by things I mean like modalities and practices that I've thought of, or I am doing, or I've been curious about. Then to get that kind of professional insight is very kind of validating. I'm like, oh yes, okay, what I'm doing does serve this kind of mental health goal, or these other things that I'm doing with my life, actually, while they might be benefiting other forms of my well-being, right now they could be negative. They could be counterproductive to this other work that I'm doing. And this other work that I'm doing, my mental health this year, has really needed to be the biggest priority. And, so my physical health has needed to kind of take a back seat. And so certain things, for example, I have a cold plunge at home. And my therapist, due to the severity and frequency of these panic attacks and old PTSD triggers, she was like, actually, while the cold plunge might be great for a lot of other health benefits, right now, it's very counterproductive to the work that we're doing. And we don't want you in that heightened sympathetic state.
Yeah, it is nice to have a bit of a co-pilot in the process, because you can be well-intentioned and, I hear all these things are good for my health. And for some people, in a certain moment of their life, yes, it absolutely can be. And that makes so much sense, especially when we think about the nervous system and spending more time in that parasympathetic state. And, I love that you can be flexible around it, because I think it's hard to be flexible sometimes.
It's not a no, it's just a not right now.
Yeah.
And that's so much more comforting, especially in our mental health journey, because it doesn't feel as defining or as limiting. And I think that's where a lot of people might struggle in mental health and getting consistent mental health help, is that it feels like a lot of times things are just yes, no. Like you can't do this if in order for this to happen, or you have to do this in order for that to happen. But it's a much bigger picture happening.
Yeah, 100%. And there's a lot of agency in that choice too, right? Of honoring the thing that you ultimately want for yourself and choosing what is going to support that process.
I want to get more into your work in NARM, your specialty in NARM, neuroaffective relational model. But first, you have, I think I found this on your website, kind of in your about section, quote, you have an unwavering interest in the human experience and the profound effect of trauma. So my question for you from that, do you think, is the human experience a traumatic one in nature?
I think it's pretty hard to get through life unscathed. There's so many unpredictable variables that can happen, and our experience of impact is really unique unto us. But especially, when I think about just life on this earth, in our own family system, transgenerational trauma, and that we are kind of sometimes we're parented by people that were also not parented by others that kind of had all the best resources at their exposure and have their own traumas that they dealt with. And so it's very contagious. And then we have all this social impact that we experience. So I think life is beautiful, and it is kind of hard too. And that it's common to have these little T's and big T traumas in our world. And it isn't a bad thing, really. It can feel quite bad, but there's so much that comes out of it. There's so much shaping of who we are, and there's so much shaping of our values in our experiences. And so, life is a traumatic one. Yeah. And it's one that allows us to
She says with a smile.
Yeah, I know. But I really believe that, because it's like, I've experienced a lot of trauma in my life, and I'm still here. None of it's broken me. It's been hard in moments, and it's made me so strong. And each experience of trauma or of emotional impact, it has given me another layer of empathy that I didn't have before. And that is a really beautiful thing, because I think ultimately what I want in life is to be as close to the human experience as possible, and to really dive into the deep end and feel things and to feel with people. And so, it's hard and beautiful, and I love it.
So in this journey of life of yours and helping other people in therapy, you specialize in neuroaffective relational model, this NARM concept you're talking about.
Yeah.
Can you kind of go a little bit deeper for us there? What is the NARM model? What is this approach to therapy? How is it unique? And how do you feel maybe it helps people in unique ways where traditional modalities might not?
NARM is such a beautiful and also kind of still a young model. it hasn't really been around that long when you think about some of these other models. Like, for example, at Camp Pendleton, like the gold standard there is CBT, which
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
yeah, which is fine. A lot of models have roots in that, but it's by itself, it's a little bit outdated when we think about treatment. But what's been really lovely about NARM is that it's, it's a very humanizing model. So the practice of it is not really manualized. It's more, there's some talk therapy elements in it, but there's also a lot of nervous system in it. And the thing that's really different in my experience of it is the way that you actually are having sessions. And when I went through my training, I was like, oh my God, I have been doing this wrong for a decade. Like the way that we do it is so different. And it's not what is being taught in school. It's not being taught in any sort of higher education. And yet the experience of it is so profound. And so what's really different is that it is state-oriented, kind of like what I was just talking about. We're looking at what a person most wants for themselves in a desired state, as opposed to changing a behavior. That is really different because most people come to therapy saying, I have anger issues and I want to be better at managing this.
Right.
I'm having flashbacks and I want to be able to calm myself down and regulate, or I'm having relationship issues, whatever the case. A lot of it is oriented towards changing behaviors. And that's not what this is. This is a model that is really focused on complex PTSD, which is, developmental trauma, relational trauma. A lot of it has to do with those formative years of childhood, but it can also be from kind of social impact and trauma related to gender or race, and things that affect our identity, that affect the way we relate to ourselves. And so when you're in the NARM experience, we are spending a lot less time focusing on the things that are disorganized, the things that we don't like about ourselves, the things that we want to change. And we turn a little bit more attention to what is organized and what is coherent. It's a lot of work around identity. It's a lot of work around relationship with self, relationship with others. And
that does seem pretty contrary to what a lot of people might be going to therapy for, or this expectation of what, air quote here, needs to be wrong with you.
Yes.
In order to go to therapy and get it fixed.
Yeah. And if you were to witness a NARM session, for example, it wouldn't necessarily even look that profound, but the actual experience of it is it's a very embodied model. So it's, got the kind of traditional talk therapy element, but it integrates the, nervous system and the embodiment. So kind of I don't know if you're familiar with somatic experiencing. So in the process, there's a lot of shifts in the physiological.
Your actual physical state. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
And it's subtle, and it's really exploring what is happening when I shift from expansion to contraction, connection to disconnection. We are all wired for connection. That's our first core need that we have. And there is also a dance of expansion and contraction that is as natural as an inhale and exhale. And it's the judging of the disconnection that is part of the problem, because that is natural. Everything in life does this dance. And so, yeah, it's fascinating how we can look at when I get to a space of connection, something happens and I go to disconnect. Maybe I start belittling myself and then I disconnect. And we see how we've developed these strategies to survive in our childhood, but they also get in the way of what we want for ourselves. And so NARM is not siding with either piece. We're not saying, oh, I'm a cheerleader for being in a state of connection. Of course, that's the ultimate need that we all have, but it isn't the goal. It's navigating the dance of expansion, contraction, disconnection, and connection. And so it's tracking these psychobiological shifts as they come up in the moment and how that relates to our own relationship with ourselves.
So is NARM therapy then, is it is there a set protocol for it, or is it more just the type of therapy that happens in each session? By protocol, I mean, yes, we're going to run NARM sessions for 90 days, for 6 months, and then there's like an evaluation, or what does it really look like, and how is it so different, in terms of protocols?
Yeah, it doesn't have a protocol like other models, and it doesn't have a timeline that you're working with. If NARM is working, if we're doing the thing, then people generally can spend a lot less time in therapy.
Really?
It's
I'm sure
really,
some people perked up to hear that.
Yes. It's not even, what's another little fun fact, which will perk people up, is, a big piece of going into therapy, especially with trauma work, is telling your story, right? And in NARM, because it's so present-oriented, we don't necessarily need to hear the details of a person's story to do the work.
Really?
Yeah.
It's not needing to go back layer after layer after layer after layer to get to some root cause that is the reason or potential reason for the present moment, again, air quote, problem?
Yeah, no.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And that is a really big shift because, I've spent a lot of time as a therapist. At this point now, it's been 13 years, and a lot of time spent in validating the child in a person, validating the experience, and not realizing that in that, good intentioned strategy, I am reinforcing a child consciousness that is keeping some of these things alive.
Aha. Wow. I've never heard this before.
Yeah. It's the magic of NARM, as
so
we say in our little community.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we are engaging with the nervous system, and we are engaging with the adult consciousness. And there's specific things that we might do in the process that you would, it's hard to look at it like a protocol, but there are certain, I'll say, maybe interventions that we would use in the process depending on where a person's at. If they start to shift into like a more child consciousness, that might help them to organize. I'll call upon somebody's organization by asking a question like, what are you noticing in your experience of yourself right now? How are you relating to yourself right now? Which calls upon a bit more of, the higher brain to take a second and okay. And it takes you out of the past because I'm asking you what's happening right now. And the more we can bring it to this moment, the more we're accessing a more organized, coherent brain that can actually integrate these experiences. And sometimes little anecdotal pieces come in. It's not like you can't talk about your stories. Yeah. It's more about how, kind of like who's driving the car, like from what state are we talking about these things? And if we're talking about our story from a state of child consciousness, then it's that reinforcement that we don't necessarily want.
That's very intriguing, like I said, but I can just imagine how powerful it is, especially for certain people navigating certain mental health issues.
Yeah.
Severe trauma, PTSD really come to life for me because that's kind of the toughest part about all that is you want to work through these things, but in order to work through them means revisiting them. And revisiting them is what is most uncomfortable for us. It is most painful.
Yeah.
And so it's this kind of like, I want it, but I don't. I want it, but I don't.
Yeah. And that is the beautiful dance too of like, yes, building capacity for that process and also doing it in a way that supports actual integration. And not re-experiencing. Because a lot of, the models for trauma treatment, like, the exposure therapy, it's like, yeah, you can kind of force yourself into collapse, and just dissociate from the story.
Yeah.
That can work temporarily, but it's like whack-a-mole, it just will come out of a different place.
Whack-a-trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. So it's a bit of like both, holding capacity and also being here in this moment and looking at that relationship. And even when I think back to my time at the military, so much of the lingering, energy was around the relationship with self. And something that came up a lot was, this idea of when it really confronting to, let's say, be with women in a group is the men feeling like monsters. A really core theme was, but I'm a monster. I know I did these things for a good reason and because I was supposed to. And I've tried to make amends, but at the end of the day, I'm a monster. And there is this deep-seated shame that is much more impactful than being triggered by the amount of people in a crowd or by specific noises. It's really the impact on self that I've found to be the most pervasive piece. And that's not addressed as much.
Right. You have some other pretty unique and, for me, familiar and exciting ways that you go about helping people, and particularly through your new work with Inscape. I know you're bringing a lot of your NARM experience and past traumatic work experience into individual, but mostly collective community experiences, also integrating with sound therapy.
Yeah.
Before we get into the sound therapy aspect, can you help us understand why, from a therapist perspective, do you feel so strongly that community therapy events, community coming together and working through and working with whatever that person is showing up with they want to work on is more powerful in that kind of community aspect?
Yeah, like it brings me back to that point that I made about healing. We heal in community, and that sympathetic resonance, which is kind of connected to the sound healing piece, is a really powerful entity for growth and expansion. And when we are in a very healthy state, let's just say in the nervous system, that ventral vagal state, that is the social engagement system. So we can amplify each other's energy. And if what's being amplified is connection, love, safety, then we can bring other people into that state that maybe aren't there yet on their own. And so that's why I'm so passionate about group work. I mean, I love individual, but I love group work because it's electric. Like there are so many things happening in that room, and it's very synergistic, and it's a powerful space. And I believe in it, the community, because I just see the impact. I have seen how profound the impact is to heal alongside others.
For someone listening right now that is interested in finally taking action and, yes, I'm going to get mental health help. I'm going to do, whether that's working with a therapist or just going to a place to talk about my feelings and just, open up in a way maybe I haven't before. Would you recommend them to take that first step into a group environment, or should it be first individual?
Well, I mean, if it were up to me, I would say group. Everybody's different, of course, but I just think that is, you just really drop yourself into the space where healing happens a bit quicker.
And you don't feel like group might be too much for somebody or prevent them from opening up more because it's, I have to open up myself to her, to him, to him, to her, to her, to her, all at once?
It is a lot for some people. And the thing about it is, even if we are sitting in silence, we are getting something out of it. We may be validated by somebody else's share. We may I've worked with people that it was so hard to even look up, to make eye contact. And in our whole, 8 weeks together, the goal was was to really just make eye contact with the people that were sharing. And that was incredibly powerful in being able to experience the actual connection, the nervous system regulation. And it goes back to, it's like, we don't necessarily have to be sharing to have an impact. And that's more true in group, I would say. Of course, we can get a lot of benefit out of sharing. And most of the time people are sharing and they get to that place. But it's intimidating. If you've never done it before, it's intimidating and it's scary to think, well, I've got to share it in front of all these people. And you don't have to do anything. But I've never made somebody share. There is the invitation and the inquiry that comes from other members of the group of like, hey, I noticed that you've been sitting there and it seems like you have something to say, but then you kind of shut down. And they notice that in each other and they invite it. And that's a very seen place to be in, and that invites intimacy, that invites the sharing of self, even if it's uncomfortable. So I'm not dogging on individual work. I think that you can do a lot in individual work.
Sure.
I just, I love community and I love group work.
What comes up for me in group is that, because I've experienced both sides of this, is that sharing something in a group experience that you're hesitant to, even to say out loud to yourself sometimes, isn't always for you. It's for the other people in the group, even just one other person.
Yeah.
And there's a level of vulnerability, but also bravery that takes. And there's also this other component of connection that on the receiving end of that, going, oh, like I might not be saying anything, I might not be giving anything to this group seemingly, but I heard this other person say this thing that unlocks something in me. And now like the kind of the floodgates are open kind of thing.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that kind of that level of vulnerability and bravery in the group environment in order to help other people, maybe not just ourselves?
Well, I think I am more interested in the impact of that than that being somebody's intention coming into it.
Okay, yeah.
You know, because I get curious about it. I'm curious about if that's the intention to help others. And that's fine, because likely that's going to happen anyways. But I would be curious. Like, I'd want to have a conversation with that person too around like just doing it for somebody else. Where else does that come up? You know?
And then what about sound? I know you integrate a lot of sound therapy and various forms and types of sound in these group experiences.
Yeah.
What role does sound play in our mental health and in these therapeutic experiences?
Yeah. Well, you know, sound is so fascinating. That was another kind of call and pull that I had. It's like, this is your next step in trauma treatment is sound. And what I fell in love with was just, that sound and frequencies are medicine, that is nutrients for our body. And when we experience disease, it's because we are missing frequencies. And that really resonates for me. And what I love about it as an offering is that yeah. And so the science piece behind it is engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, and more time spent there, it allows us to integrate, like our blood circulates better, heart pumps faster, the immune system functions better, our cells regenerate. Like, the parasympathetic space is where we want to be. It's also, like I said, the source of social engagement system. And so when you integrate the sound, which is essentially like a cellular massage, right? Like, some of the sounds are harmonic, and so it's creating a relaxing sensation in the body. Some of the sounds are dissonant, which is meant to activate and kind of bring stuff up. And yet, as the facilitator, you are curating this experience and providing this dance between those two spaces, which allows a person to sit with the experience and you can always trust that you will come back to a state of harmony if that's what I'm providing, right? There's a lot of sound healers out there that are kind of just like randomly doing the thing, playing lots of things. So you can walk out of a sound healing feeling like, wow, that was like...
That was a thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not what I was
done
expecting.
a few of those, yeah.
But I'm coming into it with a very intentional drive to look at the fact that, most people have trauma. So it's a very trauma-informed practice for me where I am assuming that people are walking into the space with trauma. And that goes into every decision that I'm making as I am playing instruments. And so I'm looking at the group. I'm watching any shifts. I'm watching the signs of like contraction or disease. And I will redirect. And I do, of course, want to like prep people ahead of time and, let them know that it can be relaxing and that there can be moments where it's unpleasant. Because it's really cool, sound travels to areas of density. So where there is wounding or tension or trauma, the sound's going to go there. And it's going to, create space and make room for release or settling. And when we finish, I love having this kind of integration group where we can process the experience. And I can't tell you how many times people say, I was having these memories pop up. Well, sound, it is activating parts of the brain that can bring up emotions. And then it's activating the part of the brain that regulates the nervous system. And so you get this experience of essentially what we're doing in therapy, right? It's bringing things up, talking about the things, and then we're trying to regulate it. And so it's doing that, except you're, lying on your back, cozied up, and by the time we end, you're in that space of social engagement system. Mostly, of course, sometimes people, they don't want to talk, and that's okay. But if they are called to be able to share that in this container that we've created has been really powerful.
If you suffer from this particular type of sound or frequency would be best suited to treat or address, or maybe kind of on the opposite side, if you suffering from this type of trauma or this type of poor emotional state, this type of sound might actually be very jarring and very triggering. So is there kind of a code, a key, if you will, for this type of mental health work and this type of sound?
Yeah, so there's definitely things out there on the internet where it outlines, like, if you want to have more love, like, this is the frequency. If you want more of this, like, those things exist. But in all of the research that I've been looking into, the healing is really in the overtones of sound. It's not the strike of an instrument that creates a specific frequency. It can be the harmonics of two and even the overtones when they are kind of sustaining. Like you have a bowl and you play it, you don't touch it anymore, and then you play another. There is an overtone that's being created, and the research shows that that's where the healing is in the overtones. And so to me, I look at that as it's non-specific. However, it is, in being intentional about making sure that there is a balance of harmonics in what you're offering.
Yeah. Do you think maybe it makes me think of in that resonance, there's a stability of that frequency, a stability of that wavelength for not forever, but like a good amount of time. Do you feel like maybe that resonance, that frequency, that stability on the person, on the receiver, activates something because it's so stable for so long that maybe we haven't experienced before, that it kind of opens up? There's like this safe frequency that's not going anywhere, so it does allow me to kind of let my guard down, so to speak.
Yeah, there's this term in physics called entrainment, which is essentially a higher vibration will kind of sync up. A lower vibration will sync up with a higher vibration, and it's sympathetic resonance. And so when we are, let's say, out of whack, something is not in coherence. We are not in a resonant space. And so when our heart entrains our brain, that then entrains our nervous system. which allows our immune system to function better. All of our organs start to be impacted. Everything goes into a state of coherence and resonance, and we have more access to, again, the social engagement system. We have more access to joy, compassion, love, all of these pleasant experiences, the flow state. That is about being in resonance. And in that, because we are electrical beings, and because of that, we have a magnetic field that extends outside of our body. So we also can impact the people around us.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when you think about meditation, kind of raising our vibration, when we do it in community, it's even more amplified. And so it's a very powerful healing process to be in community when we are actively engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, because if somebody in the room is really struggling and somebody isn't, you can entrain that person by doing nothing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's so profound to me, because I don't know if you're familiar with like tuning forks and how they work with.
I've know of them. Yeah.
Like
I know.
how if they have the same frequency and you strike one, the other one starts to sing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then you can hold the one where you originally and this one will continue singing.
Really?
That's essentially what's happening. That is the example of entrainment and sympathetic resonance. And so it's really fascinating.
Wow. And it makes me kind of think of a recent example I was sharing with you earlier. Recently went through a pretty gnarly stomach bug, and you're kind of like, oh, you're moaning and groaning. And my wife was asking me, why do we moan? Why do we want to moan? Why do we feel like moaning helps when we don't feel good? And it made me think of actually kind of the fun fact I picked up from our mutual friend Ben. I went to one of his breathwork sessions a couple months ago, doing the somatic breath work, and then it was like this humming. And, it was explaining how the humming stimulates the vagus nerve, which just allows this kind of calm, stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, but also can help increase nitric oxide. So there is a very calming effect to even just our own internal music that we can create. Yeah. So if that is true, when we do it for ourselves and to ourselves, imagine just receiving a higher level of that.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful.
That is really powerful. And it's true. The sound healing is the same with the releasing nitric oxide, and our voice is an instrument. It really is. And I was reading this research about this recently, actually, about they were testing the effect of instruments on human cells and seeing if they could have impact, or, there's a lot of research with cancer and it kind of exploding cancer cells using frequency. And a lot of these frequencies are well above what the human ear can detect. But it's specific devices that they have used to actually, they explode, because similar to like a tuning fork, if there's a singer that will sing and he can find the exact note of maybe a glass that he struck, and then he sings it to the point where it just explodes.
Oh, wow.
And so that theory kind of applied to cells. And so in this other research, they tested the cells with all the different instruments, and the human voice had the most impact.
Really?
Yes. Which makes sense, because think about the first instrument we hear is our mother's voice. We are the first sound healers, the mother.
Why? So, babies, they can be throwing a fit, and just hearing their parent, hearing their mother can just really snap them out of it.
Yeah, sound is like the universal language that has impact without words. And that's a really huge experience.
You're in a family of musicians. Music seems to kind of really run in all the things that you all do. And I'm curious, your husband being this Grammy award-winning musician, do you all ever collaborate on something like this, or are you all just always creating, thinking, doing, working in music all the time?
Well, he is busy right now doing the album that they're,
which I'm stoked for. That's amazing to hear.
It's been amazing, and it's been fun, this go around of writing, because he has a studio in our house, and so it's allowed us to be together a lot. They've had these trips that they've gone on as a band to kind of work together and create.
To create that together has to be, yeah.
And that's been fun, because they've gone to different spots to do that. But then they've got a studio where they are in Miami, and he has one in our house. And it's just been really conducive to our life as just a normal family.
To keep that harmony of your family, yeah.
But it is very ingrained in our world, and he is always making music in there, and it's fun to have it be a constant. And
do you ever sample each other's music for like your breathwork session or vice versa?
Not yet.
Say, hey, that was my beat. What do you
Not yet, but I do. It was his idea, but I'm on board with it. But he wants to help me kind of create an album, a sound healing album.
Cool. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I can see how he would have that idea.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, of course.
He's a good fit for that, and it's exciting, and I'm really looking forward to when he has some time to actually help me with that. But right now, he is very in the studio working on the album.
Love the idea of doing music. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
And someone that works so much in therapy, and whether you're one-on-one in a group or creating these sound experiences for people, I'm sure you have to be on the receiving end of a lot of heaviness. So what do you do to manage your mental health while keeping and working with and helping people kind of at like the peak of theirs?
You know what's so interesting is that even when I was at Camp Pendleton and probably the peak of what you would consider like heaviness of the work, it was a lot. But there was so much joy in it for me that gratitude was the soothing balm. The gratitude that I experienced for being in the room, for being a witness, the real honor. I mean, even when I say that, it doesn't do it justice when you say, like, it's such an honor. Like, it just sounds a little too Hallmark about it because it's almost unsayable, the experience of being in the room with a person who's willing to share their most vulnerable parts. So for me, the practices have a lot more to do with integrating the gratitude, and that looks like yoga. Yoga is the main way that I show up for myself because I can be so in tune with the experience, what I'm actually feeling in the moment. It's such a present-oriented practice, and it just makes me feel things even more so I could hurry through my experience in my day, and then I get to yoga, and I'm like, wow, so overwhelmed with gratitude and so overwhelmed with connection to humanity. So it isn't necessarily needing to like release anything. There have been some moments where it's been heavy, but in general, it's more allowing myself to feel really grateful.
To wrap it all up, those two words, what do they mean to you? How would you say you live a life ever forward?
Yeah, well, I think when I think about ever forward, what comes to mind for me is that life isn't static, that it is really dynamic and dimensional. And even if our path is not linear, it still is moving in that trajectory that is forward. And so in those moments when we feel stuck or stagnant, I want to bring into the awareness of what is our relationship with the movement of our life. How are we relating to this relationship with ourself? Because when we're in a flow state, we're moving, right? We're very mobile in flow. And a lot of flow is that we are deeply present, deeply attuned to this moment and accepting of this moment. And so when I think about ever forward, I think about that it's like, being here now and moving is the path that carries us forward.
Never a right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
I always appreciate everybody's interpretation.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to have all of your information, what you're up to and the work with Inscape down in the show notes and video notes for everybody. But where can they go to connect with you more and learn more about your work?
Yeah, I think the best place right now is just on my Instagram with Inscape. It's a good place to kind of get to know me more, and I like to post different resource things on there too, to just have an offering in the world.
And I kind of just dropped that name a couple of times, but with Inscape is your new kind of sound healing group experience. Can you maybe highlight that real quick? Yeah,
so I wanted to create with Inscape so that I could really have a space. I call it a space and an invitation because it's really, creating an actual space where we can come together and be in community and experience sound. And then the invitation is to dive inward into that inner landscape and explore really the full expanse of it. And so a big piece of it is the sound healing in the group work, and also just community as well. So.
You guys definitely got to check it out. Again, linked for you all down in the video notes, show notes. Mallorie, it's great to sit down with you.
So good.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.